Hello and welcome to Africa Speaks right here on Pan-African Television, the show where Africa's voice takes center stage. I am Victoria Wilson, and this week we take a journey back in time to a defining moment in our struggle, the 5th Pan-African Congress held in Manchester in 1945. It was at this Congress that African and Caribbean leaders, workers, and students came together to chart a clear path towards freedom and self-determination. 8 years later, we look at how the decisions made there continue to shape the struggles of today. From the fight for national liberation in Africa to global movements against imperialism and neo-colonial domination, we revisit that Congress not just as an event logged in history, but as a struggle and a living guide for today's Pan-African struggle. A reminder that the dream of unity, socialism, and liberation is not yet complete. Let's get started with our spotlight with Daniel Otu Asante.
Welcome to the Spotlight segment. Today we travel back 80 years to a moment that changed the trajectory of African liberation. The 5th Pan-African Congress in Manchester, held in October 1945. We also look at the task ahead as the people of Africa celebrate this moment. In 1945, shortly after the Second World War ended, delegates from across Africa, the Caribbean, and diaspora gathered in Manchester to chart a new course. These leaders saw that the struggle against colonialism and imperialism would have to be intensified, and that the people of Africa could not wait for reform or concessions, but could have to seize sovereignty. This was the most diverse Pan-African Congress yet. Kwame Nkrumah, the Trinidadian Marxist George Padmore, and other organizers brought together a cross-section of those active in the struggle for liberation, including trade unionists, farmers, and working-class people. What made this gathering a distinctive one was its intent that political independence alone was not enough, that economic emancipation, class struggle, and the unity of workers and farmers across the continent were essential. The delegates, in fact, condemned the monopoly of capital and the rule of private wealth and industry for private profit alone. The Congress explicitly linked the struggle for national liberation with the struggle of socialism and established that the struggle of the people of Africa and the diaspora was inseparable from the struggle of the people across the world against colonialism, capitalism, and imperialism. In the coming years and decades, the echoes of the call from Manchester would resonate far and wide. In 12 years, Ghana would become independent, and in 1958, the country would host its first All-African People's Conference, another key moment in Africa's journey to liberation. Country after country in the continent fought the colonizers out. Revolutionaries worked together for liberation and dreamed of progress and equality as the blooded flags of the colonizers were finally brought down. But the vision of Manchester was never fully realized. Our countries achieved flag independence but not economic democracy that delegates in Manchester called for. The ruling elite in many countries continue to serve as agents for former colonizers. Our economies are dependent on mere export of raw materials, and we import even food we need to survive. Africa's predominantly young population sees this and is restless for change. It is in this yearning for change that Manchester remains relevant. The spirit of Congress continues to be with us today. Its tenets drive the militant trade unions in South Africa, farmers' movement in Tanzania, communists fighting repression in Kenya, women taking to the streets in Ghana, and the anti-imperialist project that is under construction in the Sahel. Manchester tells us that we must continue these struggles and strengthen them so that our political independence is made completely by our social and economic emancipation. Manchester tells us that unity matters and that there is a dire need to bring together Africans, diaspora communities, workers and peasants, not as fragmented national unit, but as part of the continental and international struggle. And finally, the enemy remains the same: imperialism, neoliberal capitalism, extraction, and the division of people along lines of race, class, and geography. As we commemorate the Manchester Congress, let us remember it is not a dusty historical footnote, but as a living challenge. The fight for real Pan-African emancipation, for socialism that serves the many, not the few, continues. The words of those delegates echo today. The future of Africa must be shaped by the masses, not handed down to elites or dictate of foreign powers. This has been the Spotlight segment. Until next time, keep raising the questions, keep organizing, and keep believing that another world is possible. My name is Danny Otuesante.
Well, thank you very much, Daniel Otuesante, for that insightful explainer on our Spotlight segment. And then now we move straight into the Expert Speaks segment of our show. If you're now joining us, you're still watching Africa Speaks right here on Pan-African Television. So today we happen to be discussing about the 5th Pan-African Congress that happened in Manchester in 1945. To help us put flesh to this issue and understand the context better, we are joined by Comrade Kwesi Pratt Jr., the General Secretary of the Socialist Movement of Ghana and one of the leading voices in Pan-Africanism, to help us understand how the Congress, as at that time, seemed to reflect on our struggles, our ongoing struggles that happen within the context we find ourselves in today. You're welcome, Comrade Kwesi Pratt Jr. on Africa Speaks.
Thank you.
So today we are discussing, or we are looking at 80 years down the line, the 5th Pan-African Congress that happened in Manchester. Could you tell us a bit about the historical context in which the 5th Pan-African Congress was organized around that area, and why, as at that time, African leaders around the world and around the diaspora came together in that moment?
Well, 1945 was a very important year. It was a year in which the struggles of the African people on the continent and the diaspora had intensified. First, to fight against the discrimination against them on the basis of the color of our skin. Racism was very high in the world at the time. It's also important to understand that most of the countries in Africa then, a large number of countries in Africa then, were under the colonial yoke. And it's important also to understand the context of the end of the Second World War, in which Africans had fought in a war that they did not have to participate in which Africans had been used as cannon fodder virtually for European powers who were struggling against or fighting against the Hitlerite army, the fascist Hitlerite army in Germany. Now, it is significant that the Congress brought together many people from the diaspora and also a lot of people from the African continent. It's important to recognize that this Congress was the 5th in the series that had been organized. And it had come after the Back to Africa movement, had not made much headway. It had come at a time when there was general frustration about how to kick off the colonial yoke, how to build a prosperous, independent, and sovereign Africa. This is the context within which the 5th Pan-African Congress took place.
All right, thank you very much, Comrade. So could you tell us some of the discussions that happened, or some resolutions that happened within that Congress as at that time, and how those resolutions were able to champion the self-determination that most African countries were seeking at that time?
Again, it is significant to know that many of the leaders who led Africa to independence were at this conference. Kwame Nkrumah was there. Jomo Kenyatta was the joint secretary at this meeting. Nnamdi Azikiwe was there. Many of the leaders who led Africa to independence were present in this historic meeting. And therefore, there was a certain focus on national liberation on the continent. National liberation was a very key agenda on this conference. It is significant also to note that trade unions also participated actively in this Congress. And the trade unions were concerned largely about respect for trade union rights. about the participation of the working people in their own emancipation and so on. So trade unionism also featured quite prominently on the agenda in this conference. And then, of course, there were the youth movements, there were the women's movement. Broadly, this Congress brought together the whole wide spectrum of activists for freedom in Africa and on the continent.
Good. So you mentioning or situating the Congress in the global spectrum, as you were saying it. So can you tell us some of the major issues or some of the move that this Congress channeled that sought to position the struggle against anti-imperialism and colonialism in the broader global context and not just limited to Africa?
Well, one of the things that the Congress decided was that Africans everywhere on the continent, in the diaspora, everywhere, had a historic responsibility to participate in the national liberation struggle. And the national liberation struggle was basically about asserting the independence of the colonized people on the continent. It was also about creating the conditions for the peoples of Africa, one, to own their resources, and two, to exploit these resources for their own benefit. The other dimension of the discussions had to do with the unity of the African people. You know, the need to unite all the African people after the national liberation struggle. And then there was a segment of the discussions which dwelled on the efficacy of socialism as an ideology for liberation, an ideology for national reconstruction. So all the resolutions passed at this Congress emphasized national liberation, emphasized the unity of the working people, emphasized the control of our resources, both in terms of ownership and who benefited from the exploitation of these resources, and ultimately the building of the United States of Africa under the broad banner of scientific socialism.
Right. So 80 years down the line, we all know when we look around, we can see that the actualization of some of these resolutions that came up during the Manchester Congress has not been realized. We know that it hasn't come to play. Can you tell us some of the factors that has led to this?
Well, the struggle did not begin and end in 1945. The struggle continues, and even today, the struggle gets intensified. The forces against us, the forces of imperialism, multinational corporations, you know, the intelligence services of Western countries and so on, continue to work against our aspiration. So there have been reversals, there have been advances, and so on. And it's significant that the intensification of this struggle has led to some really horrible developments in our history. For example, Patrice Lumumba, who was democratically elected as Prime Minister of the Congo, had his government overthrown. And then subsequently he was arrested, he was tortured, and he was executed. And his body was dissolved in acid. I mean, that's a long story. And that caused a substantial reversal in the Congo, the consequences of which we see today in the never-ending wars that have been unleashed in the Congo. He was killed along with people like Patrice Mulele and co. were killed as part of the struggle, as part of the effort to reverse, you know, the gains that the National Liberation Movement were making, to reverse the broad Pan-Africanist gains that came after 1945 and so on. In Ghana, for example, the government of Osagyefo Dr. Kwame Nkrumah was also overthrown in a coup in 1966 with very, very serious consequences for the struggles in Ghana. Indeed, after the overthrow of the Nkrumah government, it became an offense, you know, a punishable offense, an offense which could land you in prison if you were just seen with a photograph of Nkrumah or if you distributed photographs of Nkrumah. Books on socialism and Pan-Africanism were banned, were burnt in bonfires, and so on. And this has been replicated throughout Africa. You know, more recently, for example, the killing of Chris Hani of South Africa is a manifestation of that struggle. You know, so the struggle is continuing. There have been reverses, and these reverses have occasioned as a result of the intensification of the efforts of imperialism, the Western countries, the multinational corporations and so on, to reverse the gains that we have made. The result of all of this is that we have now been plunged into a neo-colonial era in which we have the semblance of independence, but in fact, we are still colonized. And we have been colonized in many ways. For example, if you take French-speaking African countries, they are compelled to keep their foreign reserves in the Central Bank of France. And as a result, they borrow their own money and pay interest on their own money that they have borrowed. It is also manifested in the establishment of many military bases across the African continent. French military bases, US military bases, NATO military bases, and so on. All of this are signs of the reversals that we have suffered and continue to suffer, from the gains that we made from 1945.
Right. And in all these issues that you've outlined, in all these problems that you've outlined that continue to face us as Africans, what do you think are the urgent steps that we need to make sure that we realize the dreams of the Manchester Conference? And most especially positioning it in today's struggle, what should Pan-African movement do in relation to the emergence of the AES, what is happening in Palestine, and linking it to what is happening in Western Sahara? What is the path forward for us?
Well, we have no option to mobilization. Mobilization, and mobilization is the answer to the problems that confront us. Our people need to be mobilized. Our people need to be organized into formidable forces that will be able to withstand the aggression, of the West. As we speak, there are efforts to topple the governments in the alliance of Sahel states, mainly Niger, Burkina Faso, and Mali. And NATO is very, very active in subverting these governments. It's our responsibility as Pan-Africanists, it's our responsibility as socialists and so on, to mobilize in solidarity with these governments, to help them overcome the problems that their people face, and to point to the fact that these governments, these patriotic governments of patriotic revolutions that are breaking out in Africa, have our support, have our intelligence, and have our mobilizing capacity. It's important in this effort to emphasize, the point that we need to adopt an internationalist approach to the struggle. We are not sufficiently capable of resolving these problems in our so-called nation states. And we need to go outside and mobilize forces that think like us and act together in order to bring about the resolution of these problems. We cannot forget the fact that the Western countries act together. Their intelligence services work together. Their financial resources and so on are put together in the struggle against us, in the struggle to keep us perpetually poor, dependent, and so on. And their unity dictates that we also unite in this bold confrontation with underdevelopment, with poverty, with misery, and with domination.
Well, thank you very much. But finally, I think it has come to a notice that coming next month, there would be, should I put it, a celebration or commemorating the 80th anniversary of the 5th Pan-African Congress in Accra. Could you tell us about it and then the message you are looking forward to put across?
Well, a number of organizations, initially Ghanaian organizations, came together to form the Pan-African People's Progressive Front to begin to prepare for the observance of the 80th anniversary of the 1945 Manchester Congress. Now, the most important thing was to take stock of where we are today and also to define what we need to do in order to break out of the chains of neocolonialism, and also to seek reparative justice for the injustices which have been done to us. Preparations for the conference, the commemoration, are well advanced now. And as of yesterday, people from about 40 to 50 countries in Africa have applied, to be in this conference. It's also important to announce that the president of Ghana, John Dramani Mahama, who is also the African Union Special Representative, the African Union Champion for Reparations, has agreed to actually host the event and also to open the event. There are efforts being made today to bring aboard a few other African heads of states, like Ibrahim Traore of Burkina Faso, like His Excellency Mnangagwa of Zimbabwe and others, to fully participate in this conference, which is scheduled for the 18th and 19th of November. So preparations are underway, work is being done, and things look very, very bright. Indeed, the organizers are also expecting to have a recorded message from President Diaz-Canel of Cuba, and also from leaders in Venezuela, and around the world, to encourage the participants to keep on the path of liberation and justice.
Thank you very much, Comrade Kwesi Pratt, for joining us on this segment of Africa Speaks. If you're watching us, this has been a conversation around the 5th Pan-African Conference in Manchester that seeks to look at the struggles that the African people face and positioning it in the global struggle for anti-imperialism and neocolonialism that we continue to face in our world today.
Thank you so much, Comrade Victoria. I am glad to be here today, and greetings to all our comrades and all our allies that would like to understand. So I'll say that as we commemorate the 80th anniversary of the 5th Pan-African Congress of 1945, we do so not as passive historians or intellectuals, but as active participants in the struggle for dignity. We must analyze it not as a static event or just one-time event, but as a moment of concentrated political energy in the ongoing struggle between the oppressed and the oppressor. So in saying that, the spirit and the resolutions of that Congress in Manchester are not a relic. They are a diagnosis of the present situation we are in, and a prescription for the diseases that sicken our continent and the world in general. So the Congress itself was a product of its specific historical contradiction, but its scientific analysis of imperialism provides indispensable lessons for our strategy today. So when we look at it, the delegates in 1945, we had figures like Du Bois, Marcus Garvey, and Kwame Nkrumah. They identified the core enemy at that particular time as colonialism and imperialism. Their demand was clear and uncompromising: Africa for the Africans. They understood that political independence is the non-negotiable first step towards true liberation for not only the African people, but for all the oppressed people at that particular time. Now it's 80 years later. So the questions that should be running in our minds is, what is the character of our national struggles right now? And has the fundamental nature of the enemy changed? So the analysis of the 21st century neocolonialism provides the stark answer for this. And I'll say that the 5th Congress fought against the old classical colonialism, which was the direct, brutal, and open racist kind of situation that was back then. However, today we face a new colonialism. It's simply neocolonialism, which is insidious, economic, and managed by a sophisticated internal class alliance within our different territories, or to be more specific, we have a class within the African countries that collaborate with the foreign oppressors or the imperialists. So the 1945 1945 Congress, most crucial lesson remains devastatingly relevant, which is particularly the danger of the internal agents that we have in the neo-colonies. So the revolutionary potential of the 1945 was often betrayed by the national bourgeoisie, that upon seizing state power, revealed its comprador character. In nations like Kenya, we see this not as a national bourgeoisie, but a comprador bureaucratic bourgeoisie. It's a single reactionary bloc that is organically fused with the international finance capital. The historical role is not to develop the productive forces of our nations, but to underdevelop them, to act as a transmission belt for surplus value extraction from the African working class and peasantry to the imperialist metropole. They are the loyal managers for foreign capital, ensuring that the pipeline of profits flows from the sweat of our workers and our struggling mass to the vaults of imperialist banks. So essentially, as I continue, I'll say that the foreign bases on our soil, be they from the US through AFRICOM or the France, that are now being pushed away or being taken from the alliance of Sahel states through their struggle there, they are the direct descendants of the colonial garrisons. So the debt traps of the IMF and the World Bank are the modern day chains of economic subjugation, replacing the forced labor of the past. These are the political and military guarantees of the rule of the comprador class right now. So therefore, the task for us is clear. The Pan-African Congress of 1945, while progressive, was historically limited. It could win the flag, but it could not win the factories, the land, or the banks of our people. So our task is to advance the struggle to its next and necessary stage, from anti-colonial to anti-imperialist struggles, and from anti-imperialist struggles to a socialist revolution. So the demand for Africa, for Africans, must be redefined through a proletarian lens. It can no longer mean Africa for the African comprador or the bureaucratic class. It must mean, firstly, expelling the foreign military bases that violate our sovereignty. And, we should now start advancing the national democratic revolution. Also, it must mean smashing this class, this chronic leeching class, the comprador and bureaucratic state apparatus, and the establishment of revolutionary states of the proletariat and the peasantry. And also it must mean the expropriation of imperialist foreign capital and the socialization of means of production, especially land. We need land back to our people. Then also it must mean the building of a socialist economy free from the anarchy of the capitalist markets and the dictates of the World Bank and IMF. So in conclusion, I'll say that the Fifth Pan-African Congress was a necessary battle in a long war. So it lit the fire for political independence, but we must fight with the weapon of scientific socialism. So the spirit of the 1945 Congress finds its fulfillment, or I'll say true fulfillment, not in nostalgia, but in the relentless organized class struggle for a united socialist Africa.
And now to our dispatches from Africa, where we bring you updates from across the continent. In Burkina Faso, a major conference was recently held on the Manifesto for a New Pan-Africanism, dedicated to the memory of Thomas Sankara. The gathering brought together youth movement, intellectuals and political organizers to renew the call for a united and self-reliant Africa. And in the Democratic Republic of Congo, Congo Week 2025 has just wrapped up. Though the commemoration officially ended just a few days ago, the conversation continues, with campaigners urging solidarity for Congo's liberation and demanding an end to the plunder of its mineral wealth. These are the stories shaping the pulse of the continent. Let's get to it.
We have been here for a week. This is the week in which Thomas Sankara was killed 38 years ago. We were with young people who gathered here. We talked to them about the relevancy of Thomas Sankara in their struggles. These are young people who were born long after Thomas Sankara died. Even the president of this country today was not there when Thomas Sankara was there. So we are dealing with a generation of people who are still, despite being born many years after, or 3 decades after Thomas Sankara, they still draw inspiration from him. They still learn a lot of things from his work that is enduring, his work that is uniting us in our struggles. And it gives us hope, it gives us encouragement, it gives us courage, it gives us confidence in the struggles we are waging. And uniting our struggles is important. We cannot fight imperialism without uniting our struggles. We cannot unify our people and avoid or defeat balkanization of our continent without meeting. International meetings help us build solidarity. International meetings help us internationalize our struggles. And in fact, it also helps us to nationalize internationalism itself. We are today here in Burkina Faso, in Ouagadougou, uniting our struggles. We had an interaction with the president today, a very committed Pan-Africanist, a very committed internationalist, very clear about the agenda, very clear about the priorities. And here is clear. The strategic objective is to defeat imperialism and to build a more just, fair, and humane world. And indeed, if we unite our struggles and continue to struggle without respite, we will win. They are also a source of energy, a source of encouragement, a source of hope. They give us confidence. Hope is necessary because hope gives us more strength. Hope makes us bigger than we are. Seeing that you are not alone, seeing that you have got comrades who are involved in the same struggle as you, makes you have a higher level of confidence in your own efforts and in the efforts of others. It actually raises your morale, and morale in any struggle is important. Morale in any battle is important. Whether you are in the battle of ideas, whether you're in the battle of emotions, whether you are in mobilization, agitation, educating, organizing, morale is important. And also, it builds trust. It helps us build trust in our comrades. And trust is important in working together. You work better together when you trust each other, but you can only build trust when you interact, when you meet with others. I had the opportunity to meet many leaders here, and also today to listen to President Traore, a very, very, very committed Pan-Africanist, moving speech he gave us. We had a good interaction with him. And I have all the confidence that if we live and struggle, we will win. There's no doubt.
So Congo Week is a week of action. It's a global week of action where people around the world pause to commemorate the millions of lives lost in the Congo. Not only that, they mobilize the communities for them to get to learn about the situation in the Congo. It's an initiative that started by young people and students worldwide in 2008 in collaboration with Friends of the Congo. And the idea is for people to learn the history of the Congo, to find out more about the tragedy that is taking place today, and then to dream and take action for the actualization of a peaceful Congo. So from Sunday through Saturday, people will host film screenings, they will have forum, some may even do fundraisers, but the idea is for the world to remember the millions of lives lost and, of course, to take action for the Congo. So this initiative, since 2008, has had participation of over like hundreds of universities globally, and also thousands to even hundreds of thousands of people participating. We've had cities around the globe passing resolutions on Congo Week, cities in New York State, cities in North Carolina in the US, some in Australia and in different parts of the globe. We've had schools organizing teachings. We've had religious leaders hosting prayer vigils. And we've had people organize protests. So this year is much more important because the violence that has been ongoing in the Congo since 1996, even in 2008, when Congo Week started, has not stopped. The M23 rebel group, a rebel group proxy of the Rwandan government and the Ugandan government, have been raging havoc in the eastern part of the DRC, displacing hundreds of thousands to millions of people, killing scores of Congolese. As I stated, millions have died in the Congo due to the conflict, and even with the latest uprising, thousands, at least 3,000 Congolese have died since January of 2025, and they still have no justice. So this year, as people are marking the date of Congo Week, they are being asked to support the Congolese to bring an end to the conflict in the Congo. But how can progressive forces organize for a peaceful Congo? I think we all have to go back to the writings and teachings of Patrice Lumumba and as well as Kwame Nkrumah. Kwame Nkrumah believed that there could not be a United States of Africa without the Congo. And even in the United States of Africa plan, he placed the capital of the United States of Africa in Kinshasa, which is the capital city of the Congo. And he understood that Congo, the second largest country by size, the fourth largest by population, with a population of close to 120 million people, with half of the population being young people under the age of 18. We're talking about over 60 million young people, that this country can be an engine for transformation of the African continent. But for the close now to 3 decades, they have not been able to fully realize their potentials due to foreign interventions of its neighbors, Rwanda and Uganda, two nations that are US and British allies on the so-called war on terror, the neo-colonial agents of the African continent, allowing the pilfering of Congo's resources, the mineral resources needed for our electric cars, for the fourth industrial revolution, as we use AI models, some of them, like the ChatGPT and Gemini of this world, run through Silicon Valley in the United States. So this, I would say, a fourth industrial revolution, right? This geopolitical battle of the United States to control critical minerals on the African continent has caused desolation now for close to 3 decades. So we hope, as people organize, they'll lift up the story that the resources of the Congo must benefit the Congolese people, as Patrice Lumumba always wanted. They must lift up the story that Congolese people are seeking justice. They are seeking the creation of an international tribunal for Congo in support of the recommendation of the people of the Congo working in the grassroots level. And finally, that as we see these wars carving up the land of the Congo, that there is really an intention to balkanize the DRC, not because I'm saying it in this video, but because even the UN group of experts, a group of researchers who've been on the ground in the Congo for over a decade, studying the situation, publishing annually reports on the situation in the Congo, they have clearly stated in their last report in June of 2025 that there is a clear attempt to cover up the eastern part of Congo and create a new entity that brings into the question of balkanization, something that Kwame Nkrumah fought, something that's been settled at the African Union, where it was enshrined in the African Union Charter. The question of territorial integrity, that for Africa to unite as a first step today, it's important that every African country enjoys sovereignty and protect its territorial integrity from the reality of what happened at the Berlin Conference. That at least for now, as Kwame Nkrumah stated, that the borders that we have should remain as is, and that we should build on to creating a framework for a United States of Africa, rather than continuing to carve up into smaller and smaller states, African nations. So Congolese are calling for the world to support the resolution from the United Nations, a unanimous resolution, the resolution 2773, passed this February 2025. And in this resolution, it called for two things. One, for all foreign troops, particularly Rwandan military forces, to withdraw from Congolese territory. And two, that Congolese sovereignty and its territorial integrity must be protected as enshrined in the UN Charter and the African Union Charter. So as people are commemorating Congo Week, organizing, we want them to join the Congolese in this fight for justice, the fight to protect the territorial integrity, the fight to expose the capitalist exploitation of DRC through proxy nations such as Rwanda and Uganda, through proxy multinationals looting Congo's resources, through any form of neo-colonial exploitation taking place to power the fourth industrial revolution. Today is the week of Congo Week. Our call is for every single person around the world to join Congo Week. Go to congoweek.org, sign up, and take actions to be in solidarity with the Congolese people fighting for peace, justice, and human dignity.
Next is the word of the day, and this week that word is food sovereignty. It simply means the right of people to decide what they grow, how they grow it, and who it feeds. As Thomas Sankara once said, "He who feeds you controls you." Food sovereignty is therefore not just about agriculture, it is about freedom, dignity, and power. Today's word of the day is food sovereignty, a term that goes beyond famine or hunger relief. It is about control over what we grow, how we grow it, and who benefits from what we produce. Debates about agriculture in Africa are often framed around food security. But food security only measures whether people have enough to eat. It doesn't ask where the food comes from or who profits. Food sovereignty does. It insists that food should be produced by and for local people, using methods that protect both the environment and community livelihoods. Historically, the struggle for food sovereignty has been tied to independence. When Thomas Sankara became president of Burkina Faso in 1983, one of his first policies was to end dependency on food imports. Under his leadership, the country doubled its cereal production in 4 years and achieved self-sufficiency. Sankara understood that political freedom was meaningless if people remained dependent on imported grains and foreign aid. 4 decades later, Africa imports over $60 billion worth of food annually, despite possessing 60% of the world's uncultivated arable land. This contradiction exposes the structural legacy of colonialism. Economies built to export raw materials and import finished goods, including food. From Ghana to Nigeria, we still export cocoa and oil while importing rice, tomato paste, and wheat. In situations like the World Trade Organization and the IMF promote agricultural liberalization that floods African markets with cheap subsidized food from the global north. Local farmers cannot compete, forcing many off their lands or into debt. Seed laws pushed by multinational corporations further undermine indigenous seed systems, replacing diverse local crops with patented hybrids that must be purchased each season. However, movements and cooperatives across Africa are working to reverse this dependency. In Tanzania and Mozambique, peasant movements are mobilized against land grabs that displace rural communities in the name of investment. For organizations like Inviwata, the National Network of Smallholder Farmers Group in Tanzania, an organization of over 300,000 farmers, food sovereignty is fundamentally about the power of small-scale farmers to define and control their entire food system from seed to table. This includes securing land rights, using agroecological farming practices, and protecting indigenous seed varieties, all of which reject top-to-down corporate and government control. Even in urban centers, youth-led initiatives are reviving interest in local food production and community gardens. In Burkina Faso, President Ibrahim Traoré is continuing Sankara's legacy by focusing on food sovereignty. He launched the offensive agro-pastoral and fisheries development, a massive investment plan aimed at achieving self-sufficiency through local production, particularly staples like rice, millet, and tomatoes. The investment involves distributing tractors and motor pumps and the mobilization of thousands of youth, including those from the military and civil sectors, into intensive mechanized farming. It is a political rejection of dependency on foreign food aid and international financial institutions. These struggles remind us that food sovereignty is central to social justice, environmental protection, and national sovereignty. As Sankara warned, he who feeds you controls you. His message remains urgent. The power to feed oneself is directly linked to the power to decide one's future. And finally, in our history segment this week, we remember the life and assassination of Thomas Sankara, who was killed on October 15, 1987. Sankara represented the very ideals of the Fifth Pan-African Congress, a leader who sought not only political independence, but also economic self-determination, women's emancipation, and ecological justice. His legacy endures in every African who dreams of a continent united, self-reliant, and free from foreign control. To remember Sankara is to reaffirm our commitment to the unfinished work of liberation. On October 15th, we marked the death anniversary of a revolutionary whose words and actions remain powerfully relevant to this day. A man who symbolized the struggle of the people of Africa and the entire world against capitalism and imperialism. On that day, Captain Thomas Sankara, president of Burkina Faso, having blazed a trail of liberation, was killed following a coup staged by his former allies with the assistance of foreign forces, mainly the French. Thomas Sankara held power for only 4 years, but in a short period, he transformed one of the poorest countries in the world into a symbol of sovereignty and dignity. He also laid down a path towards true liberation that continues to inform the struggles of people across the world. Known as the African Che Guevara, he led a revolution of August 4th, 1983, and the next year changed the name of his country from the Republic of Upper Volta to the People's Democratic Republic of Burkina Faso, which means Land of Upright Men. He carried out radical reforms in the health, education, and agriculture sectors, charting a path to food self-sufficiency that was unprecedented in the country. His government nationalized land to guarantee access to those who worked it and launched tree planting and irrigation projects to increase productivity and combat desertification. He grasped the roots of our contemporary crisis when he said, "He who feeds you also imposes his will." It was ahead of his times when he called out the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund as legacies of colonialism. During a period when the promise of the Pan-African Project had dimmed due to foreign intervention and collaboration by African elites, Sankara boldly proclaimed that an alternative was not only possible but essential. Thomas Sankara's revolution suffered a setback with his death at the hands of his close associates and the French. They tried their utmost to erase his legacy. However, Sankara was not just one man but a movement. Today, his dream lives on in the efforts of the government under Captain Ibrahim Traoré and Burkina Faso's People's Movement, who have advanced his vision of achieving true sovereignty. As the people of Burkina Faso work towards self-sufficiency in food, the development of productive forces, and the cultural rejuvenation of society, Sankara's vision surges forward, an inspiration across the world. And that is all for this week's edition of Africa Speaks right here on Pan-African Television. My name is Victoria Wilson. We've revisited the 5th Pan-African Congress, reflected on its lessons, and heard from comrades and movements carrying that legacy forward. Until next week, keep the spirit of solidarity alive, and remember, Africa must speak and Africa must be heard. See you next time.